Are you looking for professional training in forensic mental health?
We're going to start with a little bit of information about the foundations of forensic mental health assessment, and then we'll move into the legal context for competency to stand trial evaluations. We'll talk about forensic mental health concepts that are important for the evaluation of adjudicative competencies. We'll talk about the empirical foundations and limits of competency evaluation. And then we'll kind of get into nuts and bolts of preparing for the evaluation, data collection during the evaluation process, the interpretation of the data that we've collected, and then report writing and expert testimony. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about advanced formulation and using a decision-making model for thinking through competency to stand trial and what it means in specific cases. And then we'll talk a little bit about special populations, especially those with intellectual or developmental disabilities, which are always a big component of competency evaluations in a number of jurisdictions. Here's where you need to specify how the psycholegal deficits that the defendant displays will or could potentially play out at trial or at the next stage of the proceedings in terms of functional deficits. So deficits, inabilities at trial. So step number 1 is to make the determination regarding mental disorder, that threshold issue. Step number 2 is to determine whether there are any deficits in psycholegal abilities. Step number 3 is to determine whether you can make that causal connection. Can you make that link back from the deficits you're seeing in psycholegal abilities to mental disease or mental disorder, mental defect? So typically these deficits will be tied back to specific symptoms. And then the final step, step 4, is to describe how these noted deficits that can be causally linked back to symptoms that the defendant displays, how these can potentially play out at trial or at the next stage of the proceeding in terms of functional deficits.
To learn more about Concept's professional training opportunities, visit us at concept-ce.com.